Hello there and welcome to another episode of Extreme E Off Track. My name is James Baldwin and joining me as always is my friend and yours, Michael Laminato. Hello there, mate.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
I'm very, very well, and I'm very excited for this episode as we chat with Scot Elkins, who is the race director for Extreme E.
Not only is he the race director for Extreme E, if you can imagine a job, he's probably doing it, is my understanding for Scot Elkins, because it's involved in virtually every type of motorsport you've ever heard of. Works on guitars. If you have a guitar that needs fixing, he's the man that can do it. He seems to be doing something at pretty much every minute of every day. So it is genuinely incredible he found time to talk to us.
Absolutely. And look, we spoke to him, didn't we, after the Extreme E's Arctic X-Prix in Greenland, and he travelled from there to Zandvoort. He was sitting at the Dutch Grand Prix ready to do his Formula One duties for that weekend as well. A really, really great chat. You can almost hear the wheel guns in the background too, just to get that real motorsport-y atmosphere, I suppose.
I'm surprised you couldn't actually hear what was essentially a nightclub outside Zandvoort at all times in the stands. Probably if you listen really carefully. If you've got really good speakers, turn them up, and I bet you can hear someone singing Supermax in the background.
Well, let's get into our chat with Scot Elkins and see if you can hear Supermax. We're very happy to be joined by Scot Elkins, the race director for Extreme E, and so many other amazing things. We're going to learn about all of that and more. Scot, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you.
Thanks, man. Really happy to be here.
Look, I think we probably should talk about the very beginning, I suppose, of your beginning and your story. Talk to us about where you grew up, what was interesting to you, because you've done so many things today. It would be interesting to see where motorsport fits into that.
Yes, so I grew up about 70 miles away from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And so in the town that I grew up in, if you know anything about the Speedway, you know that it was owned by a man named Tony Holman. And so the town that I grew up in, which was Terre Haute, Indiana, had nearly everything in the town was named Holman. The golf course, the convention center, because the Holman family was actually based in Terre Haute. So it was really difficult to grow up and not know anything about motor racing or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And so it just kind of became something, like everybody else. It just started for me a little earlier as a kid. I became very, very interested. And honestly, I was interested in NASCAR, but the lure of the Indy 500 was the thing that was just the most amazing thing ever. And, and I, back in the day, not to dwell on it too long, but back in the day when I was growing up, and I guess it's actually that way still today, is they block out the broadcast of the race in Indianapolis so that they could, unless it's sold out. And so I lived within the radius of where the only way, what we did was we listened to the race on the radio live and then got to watch the television broadcast of it later in the day after the race was over with. So wow. I grew up, kind of watching the Indy 500 in a very, very different way. I listened to it on the radio because that's all we could do in terms of live. So it was just, I don't know, it was just something that was incredible. And so I went to university and did all kinds of things. I did the normal stuff that everybody always does and took a job, working for one of the companies that I worked for at university and just decided, I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot and see if I like motor racing. So I'm going to give it a shot and see if I can turn it into a real life career. And I don't know, here I sit 27 years later, I guess it worked out. So,
good point.
Yeah, but I honestly, I started it working for, all the cars today have data acquisition. So they have systems that are logging data and different sensors and things like that. So I actually answered an ad in the newspaper for a company there in Indianapolis that were looking for somebody to start working with them and doing systems on go-karts and other things like that. And then parlayed that into an engineering job and then parlayed that into something else. And then, kind of worked through, I've been through every major form of motorsport in the United States, with the exception of drag racing.
Wow.
I've done sports cars, NASCAR, IndyCar, all of those levels there. And so, kind of worked through all of that and, held roles with Champ Car and IMSA and worked as a race engineer in NASCAR for a team for 5 seasons. And, worked as a race engineer on, ended up actually working as a race engineer on a team at the Indy 500, which was pretty amazing. Kind of a nice culmination of things happening there as a kid growing up. And, I think I went to the Speedway the first time when I was 12 years old. So like 1982, I guess, or something like that.
Wow.
And so just kind of made it, really exciting. And it's pretty amazing to be able, because I didn't know at the time, and I think a lot of people didn't know that you could actually earn a living and work in motor racing. A lot of people think think of it as a hobby. Even at the professional level, I think there are people that don't understand that it's a big, big, big business. So yeah, just kind of worked out, and and then about 7 or 8 years ago, I kind of stepped away from working in motorsport full time. And started my own company, and then started, consulting for the FIA, and just doing a bunch of other different projects. So now that's kind of what I do, and that's what led me to Extreme E. I'd been working in Formula E as the race director, and obviously knowing Alejandro and knowing the guys that were involved, and he kind of came to me one day and he was like, "Hey, I'm starting this new series. I need a race director." And he didn't even tell me what it was. And I was like, "Yes, I'll do it. No problem. What do you need?" And so, and then he explained it, and I was like, "Well, yes, absolutely. Yes, no, for sure. The answer still stands, like, yes. Cause I don't know, man, I don't know. You just, if Alejandro asks, you kind of just say yes, it's an easy thing to do. So it worked out really, really well. My experience with Formula E was that he knows what he's doing. So so that's kind of where that ended up. And so now I do Extreme E, Formula E, and then I fill in. I'll end up doing, I don't know, probably 18 or 19 races in Formula One as a deputy race director there.
Wow.
So yeah, I got a lot of things going on, and then I have other projects. I do a lot of stuff in the States with racetrack, what we call racetrack technology for like CCTV and electronic flag panels and stuff like that. So I have another partner with another company that does that. And then, yeah, you kind of mentioned it earlier. I also have a little repair shop for guitars that I've effectively, like, I haven't closed it down, but I haven't been able to do much work because I've been on the road so much lately. But yeah, that was the idea of that'll be my retirement job someday, is hanging out and working on guitars.
Scott, I feel exhausted just hearing the number of things that you do.
I'm sorry.
Like, it's incredible. It's an incredible number of things.
Sorry.
Don't apologize. It's incredible that you can do it. And I can't wait for the autobiography entitled, I don't know, I guess it worked out. But I do want to take you back just for a second, back to that, the start, I guess, of your motorsport passion in Indy, because I was lucky enough to grow up in Melbourne, for example. We've got major events here, one of which is the Grand Prix, but I don't think anywhere, or there are very few cities in the world that are sort of synonymous just with something like Indy is with Indianapolis. What was it like to grow up in a city that, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just the Indy 500, but that must just be so centered around this single event, and that in this situation happens to be motorsport?
Yeah, it's defined it, right? Like, it's defined the city. And because of how big the event is, every team that participates, it's based there. Mm. So, you literally, it's literally, I don't think it's a fetch to say that an industry has grown up around that event. And so, to the point of where, you look at, there's a couple of the counties that are around Indianapolis, and all of those, they actually offer tax incentives for motorsport teams that want to move there to try to encourage that development, encourage that industry even more. So, it's I don't know. I think it was, I don't know if I grew up in Kansas, like away from the Indy 500 and away from motor racing, that it would have turned out the same way. So I think it was kind of lucky that geographically I was placed where I was placed to kind of give me the opportunity to do that.
You've gone up through Indy, and as you said before, you sort of took a number of different paths, Scott, in trying to get it forward. One of those was engineering, and I think it's probably interesting from now the FIA side, certainly as a race director and a deputy race director with all the Formula races. Does that background sort of help when it comes to the trickier stuff in those little grey areas that start to pop up? And do you sort of feel like you get to thrive in those environments when talking with the teams?
Yeah, it helps a lot. It's funny. It's one of those deals where it wasn't your reaction wasn't the same way, but like when I first start working somewhere, Extreme E is a great example where I go and I'm talking to one of the team managers and we're talking through stuff and whatever, and we're talking about something relatively technical, and he's kind of like, oh, he's like, you really understand this stuff? It's like, well, yeah, I used to be a race engineer, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, then the conversation totally changes, and it's like, oh, well, here, let's talk about this. So it's helped a lot. I mean, it really does. It helps a lot, especially in terms of the from the circuit stuff that we have to do, the circuit inspections and things like that. It really helps to understand. We just did a track walk this morning, just a little while ago here at Zandvoort, and you look at a couple of the corners and you're like, oh, like if you know where the apex is, it really helps you understand where the car has to go and understand barrier placement and things like that. So it's a real advantage, to be honest. It's really, I think it's probably been a big part of helping me progress through my career in terms of what I'm doing by having some understanding of, some understanding of vehicle dynamics and definitely aerodynamics and understanding what the cars are going to do. And, I can look at the squiggly lines of the data and kind of get a feel for what's happening there too. So, it really, it makes a difference. And it's for sure something I keep in my back pocket and I throw out, in a conversation when I need to try to help it along if I can.
I can imagine absolutely there's that engineering aspect, of course, so central to motorsport, but being essentially in charge of a race weekend, there's also, of course, in motorsport, the political angle. And I do want to, again, take you back just a little bit to, I guess, a previous life of yours involved in the Champ Car as technical director, 2007. This was during the infamous split between those series, shortly just before they reunified, though I think only a year later, right? Did you learn at that point in time, obviously a really heated moment in motorsport, I suppose, certainly in the US, the political side or the ego side and the way that kind of stuff works out in motorsport, and how valuable is it to have an open mind to politicking from people you may not ordinarily consider to be playing the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's a weird analogy, but just play along with me; it'll work out. So my wife, when I took my wife to meet my parents before we were married, we were sitting at this restaurant and having dinner or whatever, and my mother had said to my now wife, she had said, she said it's really interesting because when Scott was growing up, we never really thought he was going to go down this path. We actually thought he was going to go into politics. And my wife just kind of looks at me sideways and she's like, well, he is in politics. Like, that's what motor racing is. Like, it's almost all about politics. And so it's funny how it kind of just played out in a weird sort of way, but it's one of those things where I think you have to, it requires a big open mind to understand that everybody, everybody's got their own reason, just like politics. Everybody's got their own reasons and their own constituents that they have to answer to, right? And so, but when you work for the series, whether it's Champ Car or the FIA or whatever, you always have to look at the big picture, right? So it's almost like a local politician working on his own place. Well, that's a race team. They just want everything that's good for them. And then the mayor of the city is like, okay, yeah, that's cool, but I've got to look out for the whole city, and that's kind of how it ties. It's kind of how it ties together in motorsport. And it's a weird analogy how it plays out that way, but it's exactly like that. There are certain people that want their own thing, and then there are people that have to look at the big picture. And so it's really weird. It's funny, the whole IRL Champ Car thing that happened there for a period of time was kind of strange. But I mean, you guys know motorsport's a small world. Everybody knows each other. Yeah. I can remember the only thing that was political there was the thing that really hurt was that we designed a new car in 2007 for Champ Car, the Panos DP01. And the thing that made it difficult was that we actually went through and built that car to turn it into an oval car. We put it in the wind tunnel. We made all the changes. We did all those things and presented it to them. And they were just like, yeah, no, that doesn't work. We want to do something else. And it was just like, why would you want to use something old? And like, we made this amazing thing. And politically, because of the relationships with suppliers and things like that, it just didn't work out. And so that was probably, a political thing that happened was super disappointing, because I would have loved to have seen that car become the IRL car. Cause it was, that was, that's a part of your life when you have a project like that. It's a part of your life. And I just wanted to see it continue. I didn't want to see it go and, race in whatever historic, whatever here and there, because that thing was just amazing. So that was a political thing that happened that just kind of bums you out. And makes you sad that it didn't work. But that's a perfect example of how politics come into play.
Scott, talk to us about what took you to Europe. When was it? What happened? And then what were the key differences you found, if any, between Europe and the US?
So like everything, it's
good answer.
It's kind of a chance meeting. And it's not necessarily, a lot of times, as you guys know, relationships mold what happens in your life. So it was the same thing. I was working for IMSA and got to know a guy through the driver categorization committee in sports car, the platinum, bronze, all that stuff like that. And the race director for Formula E couldn't make it to the event in Long Beach. So the deputy race director was going to fill in, so they needed a deputy. And the guy who was running the sporting side of Formula E at the time, of the FIA at the time, knew me, knew I lived in California, and called me on Tuesday and was like, "Hey man, you want to come and help us out with the Formula E race this weekend?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, that sounds amazing. When do I need to be there?" And he's like, "Tonight." And I'm like, "Okay, cool, no problem." and so I went down there and was the deputy for that one race. That was season 2 of Formula E. So that one race. And then, I guess I did an okay job, because then they called me for season 3 and were like, "Hey, we need you to come back and do the races for us." So, and I started doing that. And then the more I did that, it kind of parlayed into, going to the race director seminars and getting to know more people. And then I'd already knew Charlie Whiting. I'd already known him from doing some things. Like when we did the Champ Car project, that Panos project, he actually had invited me and come, and I sat on a lot of the Formula One technical working groups, because those guys design new cars every year. And so we were doing it in the States. It's a rare thing. You're lucky if you do it every 5 years. So he was like, "Hey, look, you can learn a lot from these guys by going to these meetings." And so, like I said, he just kind of took me under his wing and let me go to the technical working group meetings. And, I'm sitting there, some dumb guy from the United States with Patrick Head on one side and Ross Braun on the other. And I'm just like, what am I doing here? This makes no sense. And so that just kind of evolved. And so, once I decided to go out on my own, I didn't want to go back to engineering, honestly, because it's just, I hate to say it, I'll sound terrible. It's just a lot of work. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to try to find something that I could fly to, do the job, come home, and then, hang out with my family, go surfing, work on guitars, whatever it is I wanted to do, And so being a race director kind of played into that. And so the deal with Formula E came together. And then, like I said, Herbie Blesch left Formula One, and another guy from the FIA came in, and then he left and went to work at Ferrari. And so I was already doing Formula E. And so I called Charlie up and I was like, "Hey, if you need some help, let me know. I've already got the shirts and the jackets and everything. I can just show up and help you out." And he goes, "It's really good you have the clothing." He goes, "But seriously, I think I need your help." And so once he did that, then I started, I think that was 2017. So I started coming in and becoming his deputy. And I did that in 2018 and 17 and 18. And then, obviously he passed away. And Michael Massey and I have been friends for quite a long time. And so last year with COVID, they had reduced staffing and some other stuff. And then once the chance came about to do it again this year, he called me up and I was like, "Heck yeah, man. I love doing everything." So, and I like working with Michael. He's a lot of fun. Like I said, we're really great friends. So it just kind of parlayed into that. So it was kind of the Formula E thing kind of brought me into the FIA. And then, I started doing other stuff, and I've done a few. I mean, it's funny. I always joke around. I'm the guy that says yes. So if they need something for Formula 2 or Formula 3, I've been a steward for WEC. I've done other stuff for other places. I just like to do different things, and even did some Gran Turismo. I was a steward for a Gran Turismo online racing thing that the FIA did, which was super cool. It was super fun. So yeah. So like I said, I don't know. They're just like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Let's just do it." So that's kind of what happened.
Well, we'll make sure we keep your email on file
kind of ties into that.
Because we know we can rely.
Yeah, exactly. Why not? You never know.
Before we get into some more of that race directing stuff, I just do want to touch on as you said, you're doing a lot of stuff, as we've mentioned. But you're still based in California, that's right. And obviously, a lot of your race directing work is
correct.
European-based, does occasionally travel over to the US, but then also other times Asia and wherever. Less so these days, but yeah.
Once.
So how is it to split your life, I guess, across hemispheres? Because even California is the furthest part of the US from Europe, unless Alaska counts, I guess.
Yeah, no. I'll be honest. I'm one of those guys who, and I hope I'll touch wood or whatever. I hope I never lose it. But man, I can go to sleep like that, and I sleep on a plane like nobody's business. And so, if I ever lose that, I don't think I'll be able to do this stuff. But and everybody knows, like when we do a Formula E race or a Formula One race, because I usually travel on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
So I fly, all night Tuesday, get there Wednesday, and then usually I start work on Thursday. And everybody knows that I work with, like, Friday. If there's a session Friday afternoon, they know to like tap me on the shoulder, because that's when the jet lag kicks in and I fall asleep. Like it's just part of the way it works. But usually I get through that Friday afternoon and everything's fine and I can adjust. And I don't know, it's like anything else. You just do it enough, you get used to it. So, but it's, like I said, I mean, if I couldn't sleep on the airplane, I don't think I'd have any way that I could do it. It'd be impossible. And I don't have any like special jet lag tricks or anything like that. My only trick is that I sleep when I'm tired. And
when
you just figure it out. So
you sleep all the time.
But yeah,
right?
I mean, it's yeah, and it's hard. Yeah, exactly. And it's hard. I mean, I can't, I used to do a lot, but like even here, I did Greenland with Extreme E, and then I'm here in Zandvoort for Formula One. And as crazy as it sounds, I'm going to go home on Monday, and then fly back to Monza on Tuesday, just because I've already been gone 10 days now, and I'm still here, and I've still got 6 days to go for here. So it just gets too long. And, my wife also works in motorsport.
All right.
My wife's a data engineer for an IMSA team, an LMP2 team. So when we have the chance to be together, it's worth it for me to take a long flight. Just, it's going to be 27 hours, I think I'll be home, but that's enough to just keep everything together and try to, it's that balance of, work-life balance that everybody tries to do. It sounds crazy, but fortunately, the folks that, Michael understands and everybody understands that sometimes it's just stuff I've got to do to get back home for a little bit. So we'll make it work. But yeah, I mean, it's 3 weeks away is just too much. Once you hit 17 or 18 days, it's time to kind of come home and kind of just, get everything back together and, do your laundry and kind of turn around the next day. But it helps, it really does help. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it helps. And I think if I didn't have the ability to sleep on the airplane and do the, veg out and watch Netflix or do whatever it is I need to do, I wouldn't be able to do that kind of stuff. But fortunately, I'm super lucky that I can.
Well,
so
talking about race directorship now, I suppose the basic question is, how do you become a race director? Because as you said, your story is you knew a couple of people that sort of fell into line, but is there a typical path to get to that point?
There is in most countries. Most countries have a sporting authority, an ASN, that's a member of the FIA. And most of those countries have a training program for people to go through. And typically, you start out as a marshal, and then you become a chief marshal and kind of move through that. You become a clerk of the course, and then you move into like a training program for race directors. But we don't really have anything like that in the States. Because we're really fractured in the way that the US works in terms of the sporting authority. So for me, it was I worked with Tony Kottman, who is now with IndyCar, and he was the Nashville Grand Prix that happened with IndyCar not too long ago. That was his track. He's a circuit designer and does a lot of things like that. So at Champ Car, Tony was the boss, but he was also the race director, and I was the technical director. So obviously, he and I worked really, really closely together, and so I was able to really kind of see what happened there and learned a lot from him. I wasn't in race control a lot, but I was there enough. And then from there, going to IMSA, and being the COO of IMSA, the race directors and everybody reported to me, but I spent a lot of time in race control. And I would fill in for guys, for like our Porsche series or something like that whenever they weren't there. And so, and then, being around Charlie and going to Grand Prix, and, Charlie would let me sit in race control, or he was just a great friend and just a really, really great mentor in that regard. And so I don't know. It's one of those deals where you have common sense. You kind of make it work. And then I did a bunch of stuff in the States as well with the Road to Indy, and kind of worked with those guys. So it wasn't really like I was trained to be a race director. I kind of was around it enough. And fortunately at IMSA, all the race directors, reported to me in my position there. And so you kind of work through it together and kind of, taught them or learned from them and kind of made it happen. So, it's not an easy thing to do in the United States. That's for sure. It's definitely not. But in most other countries, like I said, that path is pretty well defined where people can figure out a way to do it. And I guess, I guess I'm not terrible at it because I'm still doing it. So, maybe I'm probably mediocre, mediocre enough to keep doing it maybe. Cause there's a thing in, there's a saying that we have is like, typically if somebody wants to be a race director, they probably shouldn't be a race director because they don't know what it's about. And you can't be like, you can't be 100% in your right mind if you want to be a race director. When you think about all the bad things that happen and it's, and everything's always your fault. As a race director, everything's always your fault. And when things go well, nobody says, "Hey, good job." They're just like, "Okay, on to the next one." So, honestly, it does take a pretty unique personality to do it, especially at a high level. It's a different kind of job, but it's one that I really like it. I think it's by far the coolest thing I've ever done in my life, so.
It's pretty cool. And it's taken you some great places. And you touched on there as well. We will get to some of those places later on as well, don't worry. So we can live vicariously.
It's crazy.
So part of the reason. But you touched on something there that I think is really interesting, which is that, and this probably goes for almost anyone involved in, let's say, the FIA side of things, the management side of things, is that almost the point of the job is that no one's meant to know about you and they only find out when something goes wrong, like you said, or when something unusual happens or whatever. And that's often been the case. But in the last couple of years, it struck me that that's changing a little bit. I suppose always, let's say the super fans of any sport probably know the people involved, like they might know the names of the referees in your football code of choice. But for example, on Formula E, people will be familiar with your voice. If nothing else, they'll hear you on the coverage. And likewise in Extreme E, we hear you at the start of the races. Is there a change in the sense of that's becoming a bit more public? And does that change your approach?
Yeah, it does. I don't know. It's funny. I was on a plane and I have to share this because I just think it's hilarious. I was sitting on an airplane going, I can't remember where I was going. It doesn't matter. And I was having a conversation with the person next to me. No, sorry, take that back. Sorry, reverse that. There was a guy walking down the aisle and I knew the guy walking down the aisle. And he was like, "Hey, what's up?" I'm like, "Hey, man, how's it going? What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, whatever." And the guy sitting next to me was like, "Hey," he's like, "I recognize your voice." And I was like, "Yeah, and he's like, "I don't know why." He's like, "Why do I recognize your voice?" I'm like, "I don't know. Or have you been around Formula E?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm an engineer on one of the teams." I'm like, "Well, then that's why you recognize my voice because I'm the race director." And he was like, "Oh," he's like, "Okay." He's like, "I never would have recognized you. He only knew my voice." So. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't know. It doesn't change the way you do your job, and it's one of those things where it's, I think they're excited about it because it shows part of the inside, Formula E has been doing it for a long time. They have a camera on race control and they always ask me, I have a button that's called the world button on my radio panel. And every time I push that button, I know it's going out on air. I just know it is, but it's what they asked me to do. So I try to do it and, but it's kind of strange, and now they've started doing the same thing with Michael. They're listening to the conversations he has with teams on the intercom. And I noticed there's a couple of races ago, we got a camera put in race control now, to where, it's there. So I don't know. I think it's cool. I think it's cool for the fans. I don't know that it's that interesting from a, not flying under the radar anymore. Cause you do appreciate flying under the radar for sure. It's a really good thing. And the truth of the matter is, the referee should never be, shouldn't ever be a part of the story of the event. That's not the way it's supposed to work. But I do think it's pretty cool that they, again, I'm the guy that says yes. So whenever TV asks me to do something, I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. If it'll make the show better, hence the ridiculous statement that I had to make at the beginning of the Extreme E races, So it was just one of those deals where you're just like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever will help, whatever helps you guys make the good.
You deliver those lines superbly, Scott. To a T every time. I knew exactly the time before the Arctic X-Prix, the Extreme E Arctic X-Prix. You did a great job. Can I just say?
Well, that was what they handed me was not what I said. Let me just put it that way, because they handed me a script, and I was just like, this is not going to happen. I'm like, I'll do this, but I'm going to write it myself. Like, you can't tell me. You can't tell me to say some of those things because it just makes no sense. So, but it worked out.
True acting talent.
So he does have his limits. He has his limits.
Yes.
Yeah, I do have limits. The only bad part about it was in Extreme E, the guys, because the team, what they did is they also played it inside the command center, which the command center is where the teams all stand when the cars are on track. And so 2 or 3 of the guys, like, after I talked, there were a couple of WhatsApp messages from the team managers and other guys that I won't mention as to what those said. But most of the other guys were just like, "What are you moving into broadcasting? Like, are you not going to be a race director anymore?" And I was just like, "Absolutely not! Like, I'm literally just doing a favor to the TV guys because they asked me to do it." So. It's just whatever. Again, like I said, I'm the guy that says yes. So whatever.
We can tell Andrew Coley to not have to watch his back. Then you're not coming for his job.
Oh gosh, no, not even close.
We'll get back to our chat with Scott in just a second because we still haven't heard about his music business, which is what I'm really here for. I like motorsport, but guitar repairs, very exciting stuff. Guitars, it's good. But of course, Extreme E is nothing without the core message of sustainability, isn't it? That's what we're here racing for. And over the last couple of weeks, Extreme E hosted a talk, which you can find on their YouTube channel, the Extreme E website as well, entitled Motorsport, the Unexpected Driver of Sustainable Transformation. It was a talk between a whole bunch of names you probably remember. Of course, I think we can call him friend of the show,
yes,
Carlos Duarte, distinguished professor, a distinguished friend of the show, perhaps.
There you go.
And of course, the CEO, Extreme E founder as well, Alejandro Agag, plus a whole host of other really high-profile, notable people in the science community and motorsport community. Sebastian Loeb is one of them. Talking about how, well, really at the core of Extreme E, isn't it, that motorsport can be this force for good, can not only sell but entice that message, can underscore the message that sustainability is the right direction to move forward and be a driver of it itself. Of course, I don't need to tell you, Extreme E, the cars are electric as an example. Plus, go to the website. You can find out all the other cool stuff Extreme E is doing. So let's have a listen into Alejandro Agag talking about how motorsport can be a force for good.
So I will start with a question for Alejandro, which is an obvious one, and is that motorsports is not really known for being an activity that contributes to climate action, because until recently, most motorsports were based on combustion engines. So then to have motorsports to be a driver of action is really unexpected. And I will ask you, Alejandro, to elaborate on why you think that motorsports can be a leading contribution to climate action.
Well, thank you, Carlos. Thank you, all the panelists, and hello, everyone. And it's great to have you all here on board of Santa Elena. And yes, I liked, when I saw the title of the panel, I liked a lot the word an unexpected, driver. Unexpected driver. Yes, both. Unexpected driver for climate action. Motorsport has played a role traditionally on combustion. And a lot of the developments on combustion cars have come from motorsport. But of course, now we come to a time where transportation is going through a revolution, or more, has to go through a revolution. That's why motorsport can play a role the same way it was playing a role before on the evolution of combustion cars. It can play a role now on this transformation of mobility, of transportation. And it can play a role, in my opinion, in 2 ways, and they're different. One is perceived. Many people don't believe that other cars that are not combustion, and I'm not going to go only on electric. There will be a combination of technologies, and probably hydrogen will have to play a role, and maybe other technologies. But many people still have the perception that the only option they have is combustion. And motorsport can help change that perception. And bringing motorsport first to the cities with Formula E, and now to the most remote corners of the planet with Extreme E, can show that these cars can operate in every environment. And that's the first objective, or the first achievement that motorsport can have, or the first contribution that motorsport can have to change the perception and to show everyone that they have other options for their transportation. And then there is technology. And technology not only on the cars, of course, the cars are the key element for the technology development, and specifically batteries. In our case, hydrogen is going to play a role also on the technology in the cars, optimization of the powertrains. There are many other software in the cars, and some of these teams, and in Formula E, we've been already going for 7 years, and manufacturers are developing technology that then they apply on the road cars, is very relevant. But there are other technologies around motorsport that are not in the car that are also very relevant. For example, Extreme E, we charge our cars with hydrogen. We have fuel cells here, and we are proving that hydrogen fuel cells can work anywhere around the planet. We're taking these fuel cells, these hydrogen fuel cells, here to the Arctic. We're taking them to the desert in Saudi Arabia. We're taking them to other very remote locations. So those are technologies that will be able to be applied not only to transportation, fuel cells, hydrogen, and other sustainable ways of producing energy or storing energy can be applied to many, many other different applications. So I think that's why, even if unlikely driver, but motorsport can be a really strong force for this revolution that we need to make. Of course, we tackle only one segment. I always say, people say, yeah, but if you produce the energy with coal, then the electric cars, they don't solve the problem. Okay, that's fine. We cannot take care of everything, but we can take care of a little bit, and every little bit counts. So that's what motorsport can contribute, and I'm happy that we can do that with Formula E and with Extreme E.
That was, of course, the CEO, founder of Extreme E, Alejandro Agag, in the talk entitled Motorsport, the Unexpected Driver of Sustainable Transformation. You can find that on the Extreme E website and on the YouTube channel if you want to hear more of that chat. It goes for about an hour. There's plenty of information there for you to sink your teeth into. But for now, for this hour that you're already sold on, that you're already fully committed to, we're going to get back into our chat with Scot Elkins, the Extreme E race director.
But look, you're at the Arctic X Prix. We mentioned just before we started recording that you were comparatively dry, although there was rainfall in Greenland, and that is an issue in itself. A lot of rain. And we spoke a little bit about that with Carlos Duarte on our previous podcasts. But for that weekend, you weren't in Belgium and weren't in Spa. And as you mentioned just before, correct, Michael Massey, fairly new race director. He's one of the free Aussies, I'm going to call him at the moment, because he's not trapped in Australia like Michael and I are. So he and Molly are probably in a similar boat in terms of being able to be away, but then it's difficult to come back. There was a huge amount of pressure placed on him last weekend. And I think he probably would have wished that they waited a couple of weeks to put the camera in race control for that. And I can only imagine it was a very, very difficult situation. In those situations, and for your experience as well, and you're really at the limit of the rules, there's nothing written down for exactly what had happened there. Is that really, in your mind, is that the most pressure you think an FIA race director has ever faced? And if that is the case, what's the comparative one for you, and how did you deal with that pressure?
Yeah, I would say that's probably not, that's probably not the biggest pressure. That's one of those where, it's relatively black and white, as crazy as it sounds. I told him, I said, I didn't reach out to him or text him or anything like that. I knew I would see him today or last night. And so I knew, and honestly, there's not a whole lot to talk about. Mother Nature and the weather is the one thing that you just can't do anything about. And it's one of those deals where, it always used to be a joke at IMSA where people would come up and go, oh yeah, what do you think the weather's going to do? And I'm like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Because we're going to do the event regardless of what happens. And if it's so bad, then we won't. And it doesn't matter. Like to watch, to lay there and just pay attention to the weather forecast, you'll just drive yourself crazy. And so you just deal with what you have to deal with. And unfortunately, that's what happened. And and I get it. I think, there's no way to compare what he did with what I think I would have done, because you don't know until you're in that situation. And the variables that he had to deal with, I have no idea what they are. I had no clue. But the first thing you do is you think about safety, and that's the number one thing you think about. You think about the guys that are out there who are relying on you to make a good decision. And everything else kind of is secondary. It sucks for the fans, it sucks for the promoter, it sucks for TV, it sucks for everybody. But at the end of the day, your number one responsibility is to those drivers and to take care of them and make sure they're safe. And so, that being said, I think, you do what you can do. You go out behind the safety car and and you check out the track and you talk to all the drivers and you get their opinions and you try to make a decision based off of that information. And I know that's what Michael did. And so you make the best decision you can. And unfortunately, I think it was one of those cases where, the forecast just lied to them. They thought they were going to have a window to run the race, and that window never came. And I mean, come on, man, good Lord, Spa's famous for just not draining and having water everywhere. And it's just, we all know what the situation is. I think it was just a culmination of, it's never just one thing, right? There's never one thing that causes it. It's like, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about called Outliers. And I don't know if you guys ever read it, but like there's a story in there about airplane crashes and about how it's not just one thing that happens. Yeah. It's a culmination of about 3 or 4 things that have to line up in order for, as weird as it sounds, for an airplane to crash. And so I think that's the exact same thing that happened there. It's, Spa doesn't drain. The weather forecast was wrong. The weather kept coming. Like it's just, there was 3 or 4 things that just lined up to just make it impossible to make a decision that anybody would be happy with. And I think you have to walk away from it and be proud of the decision you made, because you took everybody's safety as the first regard. And I know that, and I know Michael well enough. I know that's exactly what he did. So it's all you can do, It's all you can do. And again, you can't control the weather. We've never been able to do it.
And I'm sure if someone asked you, you probably would say yes to try anyway.
No, I don't.
Look, that's
a
great segue before we just start talking about some of the extreme
Not
stuff. Is that one of the other feathers in your cap? A lot of feathers in that cap is a director of the Motorsport Safety Foundation, a US organization. I want to talk about safety a little bit more broadly, because that is also fundamentally, as you said, at the heart of your work with the FIA as well, being a race director. To me, it's always struck me that safety is a little bit of a quiet achiever in the R&D space of motorsport. People sometimes take it a little bit for granted, sometimes even complain about some of the new safety things that come in from time to time. How much is that a part of what you do generally, really?
Yep. I mean, it filters into everything you do. At least in my life. I mean, it filters into everything, whether it's even to the business of where we do trackside light panels and CCTV and things like that. That's all still a huge part of safety. The Safety Foundation, we don't really focus on motorsport. We try to focus on really just kind of regular track days is what we really do. And in the States, we have this thing called HPDE, High Performance Driver Education, which is, guys with Porsches and Ferraris or McLarens or hell, even Civics that just want to go out and drive their race car on the track. And so what we've tried to do there is we've created a program that certifies instructors, so that the instructor who's out there training these novice drivers and teaching people how to drive on a racetrack has some level of training that is a standard, right? And so that's what we do at the Motorsport Safety Foundation in general, is that we help those guys and we certify the organizations and certify their training methods and try to make sure that the people that are teaching the other people how to drive have some level of a standard that they're applying to. So that's a big part. That's a big part of another big part of my life that I didn't even mention, Michael. I'm glad you brought it up. I totally forgot about that. Another thing that I do. But I mean, in terms of safety, I mean, it's everything. I mean, it's every track inspection, every time, you sit behind the panel as a race director, it's always there. It's like the first thing you think about when you're working in motorsport. And I don't know how you don't, you're right. I mean, it is a lot of times it's the secondary thing, until something happens. And then all of a sudden, I think the Halo is probably the greatest example of anything ever, which it was so controversial. It almost didn't get there. Fortunately, Charlie and the other guys that were involved at the FIA at the time forced it through, and no question, it has 100% saved people's lives since it was implemented. I mean, there's no secret about that. Like, we all see these incidents, whether it's in Formula 1 or Formula 2 or 3 or whatever it is. We've all seen it happen. And it's just it's one of those things, like you said, it's at the background, and then it's the foreground because it's controversial, and then all of a sudden the minute it works, and we're all kind of like, wow, okay, I mean, just think about Grosjean going through the barrier. Like, it's one of those things where you're just like, what? How in the world did we ever live without this? So, but yeah, it's everywhere. I mean, it's in every aspect of everything you do in motorsports at the jobs that I have. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Extreme E now, Scott, because, I mean, this is the Extreme E podcast. It's probably a good thing to do that. There are only 5 races on the calendar, and we don't know where the last race is yet. That's to be confirmed, unless you'd like to reveal that ahead of anyone else here first. But that's 5 more weekends on top of an incredibly busy schedule. You mentioned when Alejandro said, will you do it? You said yes, and you found out that it was Extreme E and what then happened and what it stood for. How do you manage that? And is there an added benefit to you going to these events because of what Extreme E stands for and what it's trying to do?
For me, it's, I didn't, I'll be honest. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest. In a effectively, if it means anything to your listeners, effectively a red state. Mm-hmm. So, which is not really, not too crazy. And I lived in the bluest state there is now in California. So, so I didn't really grow up thinking about the environment and whatnot. And then the more you get you're around extreme E or Formula E or things like that, the more you start thinking about everything and you start, getting involved, and you go off and, and I'm on the airplane and I need something to watch on my iPad, and I pull up, DiCaprio's movie about environmentalism and things like that. So you start thinking about it more and more and more. And then the more you think about it, the more for me, the more things kind of like start filtering into your life, and you start thinking about, how can I can't make a huge difference because for Pete's sakes, I'm literally flying around the world on this giant jet. That it doesn't make any sense for me to say that I'm an environmentalist if that's what I'm doing for a living, and that's how I'm doing it. And I'm doing it from a place that's so far away where every flight is a 10-hour flight. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that said, we still do a lot of different things in our household that we try to do to make a difference, and whether it's from water consumption or making a decision to, reuse, we use refillable bottles for our dishwashing detergent and some of the things like that. So we try to make little differences, and it's not easy, but working in the electric space and having these thoughts, I think if you're an open-minded person and you like to learn, which is something that I really, really like to do, I really like to learn. It only makes sense that you adjust based on some of these things that happen. And so, while I'm not, I don't have solar panels on my house yet, and I don't, there's certain things I haven't done, but there are things that are definitely, if you look at my Google search bar, you can see that I've been looking at a lot of things that are related to the environment because it just has permeated my life now. And it's a total dichotomy, right? It's total dichotomy that I come from Extreme E. In Greenland with one of the biggest environmental issues going on in the world. And then I come here where it's nothing but petrol. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's just the work. And like I said, you try to, I think if everybody just tried a little bit to make changes in their life, it would multiply and turn into a massive change. And so, it's, again, I'm not going to preach about it because I'm a little bit of a hypocrite because of the life that I live and the choices that I make. But I still think it's making an effect. And that's what I love about Extreme E. I mean, I just had a conversation a little while ago having lunch with a journalist who works here in Formula One. And he's like, does it make sense that you guys go to these places and run these tracks and do whatever and then just leave? And I was like, well, I said, the truth of the matter is all of the races that we've had so far, we didn't really run the race course in a place that wasn't a road or a path or a trail already. All of those things already existed. It's not like we went in and destroyed it because of what we were trying to do. And the fact is, when we go to some place like that, I mean, driving down the beach on Senegal and seeing all of the trash, and especially the freaking single-use plastic, it hurts you right in the core of your body. To think, how in the world can we be doing this to our planet? And so, again, I'm not some crazy environmentalist or anything like that, but this stuff, I mean, if you're a human being, this stuff affects you, and going to Greenland and seeing the glaciers and just seeing what's happening there and seeing how, listening to Carlos and listening to these guys talk about that and talk about where, something that's very, very close to me is wildfires, because California is having the worst season ever, right? And to hear that the smoke and the ash and everything from those fires are going to that glacier, like, I'm sorry, but I mean, anybody that says we don't have a climate problem is crazy, because it's right there in front of you every day, and you just so again, I'll get off my step or whatever, but I mean, it's one of those things that being around it and seeing it firsthand, and having the experience of being around electric racing and talking to these people, it has affected me. It's made a huge difference in the way I think about things in my life, and that, to me, if it's affecting me that way, then I hope it's affecting others, because that's the whole point, right? Like, it's the whole point is to bring attention to Greenland, and to bring attention to Senegal, and to bring attention to, the fact that the desert's getting bigger. Most people are like, whatever, not a big deal. No, it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal in terms of the well-being of the entire planet. So I'm a firm believer. And of course I work there and I get paid by them. That's not a secret, but it has affected me personally, 100%.
I mean, you raise a really great point there, and I'm afraid I can't remember who said it. So, like every good quote on the internet, I'll just say it was Albert Einstein or Muhammad Ali or something. But
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln, another
they're all
great
Abraham
quotable. Yes, I'd rather be a hypocrite than a jackass, and I think that
exactly.
is the important thing to remember in a situation like this. Like, no one can be perfect; there's no pure person, but it's important to try and make a difference. And it strikes me that someone like you, to take it back to the start almost, from Indy, the heart of, let's say, motorsport and motorsport generally, but also what we might term an older style of motorsport, a classic style of motorsport, knows the value of getting people passionate about something, and the value of messaging that motorsport can bring. The Indy 500 is a huge event. People know it naturally, almost without even needing to learn about it. How important is that motorsport, I guess, generally, or any major event, but we're talking about motorsport, of course, does use that platform for something more than just itself, as it seems is increasingly becoming part of all major events?
I think that's, I think it's the reason why most of us are here to do this. I mean, to be able to take a platform, as an example, your example is 100% spot on. There are, who knows, and I'll make up a statistic, hundreds of thousands of people who watch the Indy 500, who that's the only race they ever watch ever. Like, and they don't know anything about motorsport, and they don't know anything about IndyCar racing, and they don't know anything about any of it. But hey, it's the Indy 500. Just like me, I don't know anything about American football, but I watch the Super Bowl because it's a party and my friends get together and we all hang out, and that's what you do, right? Like that's a thing you do in the States. You get together and watch the Super Bowl. I don't ever watch any of the regular season games. Truth of the matter is, I've never actually been to an American football match ever. I've never been to one. But when the Super Bowl's on, I watch it. If I watch it because of the halftime show, maybe that's my secret, whatever, it doesn't matter. So the same thing applies to motorsport. I mean, if you have the ability to expose people to something that they're not used to being exposed to, at some point, I would think human nature kicks in and they become interested in it, and that's the target. I mean, that's the whole target. I mean, whether people like it or don't like it, people watch Extreme E. Whether they're fans or not, whether they think it's the dumbest thing in the world, people still pay attention to it. And the beauty of the world that we live in now, that everybody has a voice on the internet, that's why they watch it. So if nothing else, there are people that watch it so they can complain about it, And so it's an interesting situation that we have in the world. I don't even know if it's a dichotomy. It might be bigger than that, but like, it's really, really interesting that we're bringing notice to things that people wouldn't even care about through motorsport. And whether that's the We Races One program in Formula One or whatever, I don't know, man. I've always felt like that's the whole idea of having a platform, is to utilize it and to share that information. And I think, and some people are, it's the same thing. People are like, oh, you're a celebrity. I watch you in movies, and that's all I want to do. I don't want to hear you talk about politics. I don't want to hear you talk about social whatever. But I think that's the role of people, that if you have a voice, you should use it. And if you don't use it, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself and everybody else. So, I think that is the role of things that are popular with people, and a lot of people don't like it, but I support it. I support it 100%. I think it's great.
Zach Brown recently announced that McLaren is joining Extreme E for next year, which is very exciting. And Tanner Faust, of course, we know is one half of the team. Yeah. Interestingly, in his release with that, he mentioned that when Alejandro came into the Formula One paddock at the very beginning of Formula E, everyone kind of laughed him out of the room in that it was ridiculous. And Formula E never really got the ability to start at that sort of same level. Fast forward to now with Extreme E, and we have the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, Jenson Button, Sebastian Loeb, and on and on and on. All of this motorsport royalty, effectively, who bring about a willingness to do more, a huge social following, and as you say, some will be following them because they want to hate against their messaging or whatnot, but they're still watching it. What has it been like for you? Because you mentioned that you got in sort of fairly early on the ground floor of for Formula E, comparative to Extreme E now, and seeing not only all these big names wanting to do this to spread, I suppose, the environmental message, but then for the very short period of time where they're in the car, literally smashing into each other if you're a particular rallycross driver and you come from Sweden, for example. What's that difference like for you? And is it exciting from that point of view to be able to see that they can do both?
Yeah, I mean, I think the part of it was, I think when he started when Alejandro and the group started with Formula E, it was easy to, dismiss it and say that it wasn't going to work. And let's be honest. I mean, the Gen 1, when we were, they're like, wait a minute. So you're going to have two cars and then the drivers are going to swap cars to get through an hour race. And I think all of that was questioned. And then once the competition took over and everybody understood what was happening, and then once they opened it up and realized that manufacturers could come in and do development on their own motors and their own inverters and their own systems, and so all of that kind of grew into its own, right? So I think the folks at Extreme E had a huge advantage by saying, yeah, we can do this because look, we just did that. And so, it builds confidence with everyone, and they've seen what happens. And, so I think, I don't know. I mean, I think the environmental side of it. I also think the other side of Extreme E, which is unique, is that the type of racing that we're doing really has never been done before. It's a combination of rallycross and off-road rally and off-road truck racing and circuit racing, to be honest, because it's very similar with the way we do the switch. And you effectively have a pit stop, and it's a great mix of all different disciplines of motorsport. And I think a lot of that probably had something to do with it too, that brought people and got them really, really interested in doing the racing. And I love the fact that we've got people like Kyle from the United States, who's a straight up off-road racer. And then we've got Christopherson, who's a world champion WRX racer, along with Carlos Sainz, who's the king of Dakar. Like, it's just, you look at all of these different blends, man, it's so cool. And it's so amazing. And you can tell there are certain tracks that are advantage to the other guys. And I mean, it's amazing. But I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Formula E ended up being successful and being extremely, I mean, for Pete's sakes, it's a world championship now. Like, you can't get more successful than that. And so I think that probably helped a lot in selling the idea of Extreme E. I think the environmental aspect of it, it helps a lot too. I mean, Seb Loeb is the last guy I would ever expect to stand up and talk about the environment, but he's been doing it because he kind of, like I said, you get around it and you start understanding it and you start believing the message,
Absolutely. And there's also this additional aspect, and I guess it must be relatively new for you as well, but this is not anything like it's like a circuit race in those respects you said, but racing in the middle of Greenland next to the glacier is not really anything like being at Zandvoort, for example, in the race control tower. What's that been like for you, judging these races? And have you had any highlight moments, whether inside race control or outside race control, from the series so far?
I mean, I'll be honest. It's and this is a horrible answer to your question, and I apologize. I'll apologize firsthand, but it's not, being in race control, it's not that different. It's not that different from, I mean, you're still, and I'm lucky because I have all the resources in Extreme E that I have everywhere else, but I'm still looking at multiple cameras. I've still got the ability to do what I need to do and kind of see things. I've still got software that I can use to track the cars and see where everything's going. So because of those resources, it's really not that different in terms of the actual operation of race control. What it boils down to is the racing. And that's the thing that's really different, because it's it's a standing start. Now we're doing 5 cars in the final, so all 5 cars are in the same the same row. Those are the things that are quite interesting. And the thing that makes you watch it more is that, well, of course there are hot spots on circuits, where you always have an incident in turn 5, or you always have an incident or whatever. With this type of racing, there aren't really. You never know where the hot spot's going to be. The perfect example of that is when Seb Loeb passed around the lake. I don't know if you guys saw it, but we rode around a lake on the course, and I'm literally sitting in race control going, no, not there, not there, not there. I was freaking out because I didn't want him to pass there, and he pulled it off, and it worked out great. But if it hadn't, we had a boat there in that lake just to do recoveries in case something happened. We had a boat and people there to do it. And it was just like, okay, when you want to talk about things that are stressful for a race director, like that's it. Like if you don't know what's going to happen, you have a plan in place, but you never actually know how you're going to react until it happens. And so it's those types of things that really are different about this, the regular part. I mean, the starts, again, sitting in race control, being there, all of that's a lot of it's the same. It's just the idea of not knowing what's going to happen is, it's a little bit stressful. I'll be honest.
Well, at least you won't know what's going to happen in the next 2 races as well. And it's probably going to be the same for every Extreme E race, because it's hopefully the first time we get there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But
exactly.
You have to have something to de-stress yourself. And I think this is a nice segue into talking about your music and talking about your guitars. Because if you weren't doing enough random, but still in motorsport kind of vein stuff, you are a guitar tech, you have your shop. How did that come about? I've got so many questions. How did it come about? What was your favorite guitar that you've worked on? Who's your favorite band? Talk to me about music, because you probably get asked about motor racing all the time.
Yeah. So I've been a struggling guitar player almost all my life. Started, stopped, I think it's probably the same story for a lot of people. And so when I left working full time and, started my own business and knew I was going to have more time to do things. And my father-in-law is a professional musician, who plays guitar. So, and my mother-in-law actually has, sang in musical theater. And so they're a very musical family, and my wife can sit down and she can play anything. Drives me crazy. So I was like, and so my father-in-law, he was like, look, he's like, now you finally got away from the stress of doing this full time. And he gave me a guitar, and he's like, here, get back to this. And so I did, and I started playing a lot more and spending a lot of time, with the instrument. And the more I did it, the more I kind of, unfortunately that right side of my brain started kicking in, and I got interested about it, and I was like, oh, I want to adjust it, and I want to tweak on it and whatever. And so as I worked through it, I was kind of like, man, I think I can do this. I think I can figure it out. So I found a technician in Nashville, home of country music, and found a guy down there and went and studied with him for about 6 weeks, to kind of get a head start on what I was doing. Wow. And so I went and did that, found him. He ended up becoming a great friend and really enjoyed him. And then came back and kind of just started doing this minor stuff, like setting up guitars, adjusting the height of the strings off the fingerboard and things like that. And then just kind of parlayed it and kind of turned it into a business. And so I've had it for, I think I've been going on 7 years now, doing that. And I went and got, I got to be I'm a certified warranty repair center for Taylor guitars.
Wow.
So, just kind of doing some of those things. And, and the more I did it, the more I was like, this is really what I really enjoy doing it. I don't get to work on my own guitars anymore because I have too many guitars for my customers. But it gives me a chance to, I get to pick up multiple guitars every day and get to do a lot of things. And it really came in handy during the pandemic last year because, motorsports had kind of shut down. And so I was super busy and the guitar industry really really launched really big because people were sitting at home. So people started playing guitar again. And so it was really good in terms of the business last year to kind of help keep me busy. Because I don't think I've ever been home for 6 months in my entire life. You know, it was just such a different approach. So, but yeah, I mean, it just kind of, I don't know, it's one of those things where, you know, someday, I mean, I've been doing this 20 some odd years, you know, and someday I'm going to stop traveling. And so it gives me something to sit down and do and play with and something to do after traveling in motorsport, you know, as much as I'm doing now. And it's something I love. I mean, it's just a perfect checkout of, you know, of what I'm doing here. And it's not just playing, but, you know, working on them. I mean, heck, just even having a customer come in and just putting new strings on it, you know, and cleaning it up and returning it and returning something to the customer in better shape than it was when it came to me. Like, that's a huge, huge thing that just really selfishly makes you feel happy and makes you feel proud. You know, and they come to pick it up and they unzip it and they see that the fretboard's clean and the frets are shiny and they're just like, holy cow, like, this is amazing. And it's like, yeah, you know, it's just part of the thing. It's just, you know, and it's not art by any means. It's just skill and using your hands. And it's so different than what I do in my other aspects of my life. It really brings me joy, really brings me a lot of joy. Awesome. So, it's fun. And I'm in terms of music, dude, James, I love everything. I'm not even joking. I love everything. The one thing that I do gravitate towards quite heavily is that I'm 100% a Deadhead. I love the Grateful Dead. Awesome. It's one of my biggest things. Like, I'm so excited. In 2 weeks, I'm going to go see the current iteration of the band. I get to go to a concert for the first time and I don't know how long. And so I'm super, super stoked because I got a week off in September and I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to take I've got an 18-year-old daughter and a 21-year-old son. And I'm going to take them and I'm going to share my love of the Grateful Dead with them for the first time. So it's, it'll be a blast. It'll be a blast.
That's so great.
That sounds awesome. Absolutely awesome. And look, Scott,
yeah, it should be fun.
It's been a huge pleasure to have you on this. It's been fantastic that you managed to find any time at all in your incredibly busy schedule just to talk to us. So I'm impressed even on that level.
Thanks, guys.
But so great to have you on. And
it's fun.
It's great to hear your voice on Extreme E, of course. And good luck for the rest of the season.
Thanks, guys. It's been a real blast talking to you, and it's been really, really fun. So thanks a lot for giving me a chance to share some things and just talk about some stuff. It's I don't know. I live a pretty cool life, and I'm super grateful that it has worked out the way it has. And I mean, I'm a kid. I didn't get on an airplane until I was 26 years old for the first time, and now I think I'm going on over 60 countries. So this life's brought me some pretty cool stuff, and I'm really, really grateful for it. So I appreciate the chance to actually chat about it and talk through this with you guys. It's been really cool.
That was our chat with Scot Elkins, the Extreme E race director. If you didn't recognize his face, as he said, you would almost certainly have recognized his voice if you watch virtually any kind of motorsport. His voice has appeared on team radio. He's the man in charge. Doesn't want to read a script, but will for the right price or encouragement. He's a good man.
Yeah, I loved that. And look, as much as I want to send my guitar to him to be fixed, and I have a couple, I'm just not sure it's going to come back in a timely manner because he's just doing all of these flyaways.
Just send it to Sardinia. Beat him there.
Good point.
It'll be ready in his hotel room.
Well, at least we have some connections into the Extreme E fold. We can just find out where they're all staying and just send it. Maybe just direct send it to the St. Helena, and you can just be there ready to go. That would be good for him. But no, what an absolute legend of a human being, though. And just to be able to hear how he makes it work with his family as well was really interesting, that he, you know, commits to being on a plane as much as he can to go back to California. So cool. And he does so many different things too. And to have that sort of experience, I suppose, especially when we were talking, which was, you know, after the Belgian Grand Prix in Spa for Formula One had just been canned because of the rain, and going into Zandvoort, as we said, and with all the rain that had happened in Greenland too. Very, very interesting chat from every perspective. But Michael, we've had a couple of people leave us a review, which has been really, really awesome.
Yes, we have. Look, I'm going to go straight to the one that's got my name in it, which is Michael for President, which is Look, if someone wants to offer me the job, I'll take it. I wish I regret reading this because then I have to read all this praise for me.
Yes, go on. No, you have to.
But I'll say, look, I'll skip the first line, which describes me as incredible and an absolute star. But says the podcast itself is super informative. Can't wait to hear more from legends like Molly and learn more about this pioneering motorsport. James was fine. Yeah. So that's on balance, that's positive for you still, I think.
Yes.
That's all right.
I mean, as the overarching thing, I guess I'm going to take that as a positive note for me.
Thanks very much, Tom J. Camp, for that one, by the way.
Yes, absolutely, from Australia. Mr. Wyndham from Australia leaves 5 stars, says classic, a great example of what happens when you put Australians in charge of your official podcast. You get phrases like the Odyssey 21 is allergic to yeeting and invest in big nut technology. Great stuff. Here's hoping we could see Extreme E come to Australia in the future. I'm sure there's some places that would really suit the championship up in the northern beaches in Queensland between rainforests and coral beaches. A massive thank you to Mr. Wyndham for that.
Good call too. I forgot about big nut technology as well. Got one here from Alex. Such great insight. This one doesn't praise me as much. It praises us equally, which is good. Came across the Off Track podcast after watching the last round in Greenland. James and Michael give such great insight into Extreme E along with a whole load of laughs. Oh, it's good to know someone's laughing. New favourite podcast. Big praise.
Big call. Well, look, thank you to you if you've taken the time to leave us a podcast. There's a few others as well. And to Aya and to Harry, to thank you for that. And look, if you feel the need to take the time to write us a review in Apple Podcasts, we would really appreciate it. Michael and I, as said here, we're doing it from Australia, the other side of the world, but we are absolutely loving, aren't we, Michael, talking to all of these people involved in Extreme E. And there's interesting stories from people up the front, like we said with Molly, but also the race director, those who you don't see, and people like Timo Scheider as well. But we do have some excellent guests coming up on the podcast, don't we?
Boy, do we. We've got the big man himself, who I assume that's what he requires people to call him, Alejandro Agag, the founder and CEO of Extreme E and a bunch of other stuff, of course. Let's not just say he's the starter and founder of Extreme E, but he's going to be coming up to tell us, well, what the brainchild idea was for this series, how it got started. And I can only imagine he's got some great stories to tell as well in the first season of this terrific championship. Yeah, it's good. It's going to be good to talk to the source, the brains trust, I suppose, of wanting to get this series put together, because we love it now, and because we're understanding it, it's still finding its place, although we do now know that Series 2 has been confirmed, Season 2 I should say, so we get to look forward to that for next year. But after Alejandro, we have the Island X Prix, don't we, in Sardinia, which is going to be fantastic. You'll be able to hear our pre- and post-race reviews for that too. But to be able to do that, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can click the follow button, because of course they've changed that button name now on Spotify and all of the usual places. You can also find us on Extreme E's official YouTube channel as well. But Michael, that was such a great chat. I am so looking forward to chatting with Alejandro, but also the Island X Prix too. It's going to be a great couple of weeks coming up for Extreme E, isn't it? And Extreme E off track in general. I mean, if we're having a good time, I'm sure everyone else is. That's all I'm thinking about when we're doing this podcast. So I'm really looking forward to absolutely the next race, because I've heard some stories about the terrain we're going to be tackling there, and it's going to be interesting. Interesting is a good word. Well, thank you so much for listening. It's time to end, and we'll see you in only a couple of weeks' time as we chat with Alejandro.